So in our final panel, we will have this panel moderated by Gonick. And if there's anyone in the audience that does not know Lev, you will get to know him this afternoon. He is our Chief Information Officer, did I say that right? Chief Information Officer here at CASE, and also the Vice President for Information Technology Services. Many of you know Lev because of, over the past 10 years, I believe he's been here at CASE. He has also become absolutely a part of the Cleveland community and has brought, not only with his vision, he's brought innovation, and again, not only to our university, but to our city. And we're very, very happy that he's here with us. So I'm going to turn that over to you, Lev.
Thank you, Wendy. I hope we could start by just taking a moment to thank Wendy Shapiro for a fantastic gathering. I suspect that Wendy will have thank yous for others, but I wanted to make sure that I snuck in a thank you to Wendy before. Let us invite everyone who's walking in to come on down. We're going to take Dave Weinberger's admonition seriously here. The wisdom is, if we can use Peter Whitehouse's notion here, with David. All the network effect is in the crowd here. We're going to try to make sure that we get knowledge from you by engaging with you. We thought we would try to start the conversation up here. The detailed notes about our distinguished panel are in your program. I should simply say that as we were getting going in trying to organize a pre-conference conversation, my colleague, David Fleshler, who's the Associate Vice Provost for International Affairs here at CASE, happened to be in China. My colleague, Heather Stewart, who is the President of Global Technology at NYU at New York University, happened to be in Abu Dhabi. And my colleague, Lera, who is actually responsible for a strategic direction in the Office of Learning Technology at UOC, which is the Open University of Catalonia. I figured she would be in Barcelona. But actually, what we learned was that the only way you were going to avoid being engaged in conversation about organizing this panel was actually to get off the grid, and that's exactly what Ava did. She was off the grid, and we found ourselves organizing asynchronously for today's panel. It's a pleasure to have these three friends and colleagues here with us. And we really, in some ways, not only is this a nice topic for conversation in and of itself, the idea of exploring how, in fact, we support the learning journey of students and the ongoing scholarly exploration of our faculty in a hyper-connected world. It's also a nice way to end today's CollabTech, because all day we've been hearing about the effects of the network, not only to help us or challenge us to rethink the nature of what is community around geography, to challenge many of the received wisdoms about knowledge itself. But really, both tacitly and formally, we've really been talking about how to think about the learning enterprise, the enterprise which is both about institutions, people, communities, in a global context, the creation of a global village. What does it mean to have global citizenship in that global village? How do we make sure that that global village has more good things going on in it than things that are not so good in it? And that's the set of conversations that we hope to start here, and we invite you to obviously join us. We'll definitely leave a nice chunk of time for audience engagement with the panel. But because probably some of you don't know as well as I do what my colleagues are doing in their day jobs at their institutions, I thought we might start with Heather and just invite her to briefly share what her institution has been doing in the global arena, and obviously a little bit of her role in the international arena. And then we'll ask David and Ava to do the same quickly.
Thank you, Lev. Hello, everyone. Heather Stewart from New York University. And my role at New York University has come out of the academic technology arena and into the global technology space. So what that really means, and in particular in relationship to the Global Network University Initiative that is part of New York University, is looking toward services, support, and innovations for faculty, for teaching, learning, research, and student life at the global locations. NYU has a pretty rich history of study abroad. For many years, it's actually been one of the biggest importers and exporters of students internationally and in the United States. At this point, NYU has engaged in an initiative that's highly strategic and involves the creation of portal campus sites. So these are comprehensive campuses at other locations around the globe. So building on not just the faculty who take students abroad for, I would consider these ad hoc trips to different locations, and then repeatable trips or trips that go to repeat locations. And then the next order is places where there is some sort of NYU presence internationally that exists over time. And the new global strategy is also setting up these portal comprehensive campuses that award NYU degrees, our NYU students, NYU faculty. Our first was built a year ago in its temporary location in Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates, moving to its permanent location on Saadiyat Island, also in Abu Dhabi, in 2014. And our second comprehensive site is building towards Shanghai in China, and there are potential others in the works. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Thanks, Heather. David?
Thanks, Lev, and good afternoon. It's always a little humbling to hear what a university like NYU is doing when you're sitting and trying to really build a program in my case, at Case Western Reserve. I am, as Lev said, the Associate Provost for International Affairs. It's a position that's only been around for a little less than 2 years now. It came out of the university's strategic plan. One of the main focuses of the plan was internationalization of the university. And so out of that came the creation of an Office of International Affairs. What was particularly striking when I started was going around the campus and talking to people. So with your permission, and given that I think we know that the wisdom doesn't lie just among those of us here, I'm going to do something that I've done with a number of different groups when I've talked to them, which is, because I know most people are from sort of the Cleveland or Northeast Ohio area, to ask, when you think of an institution that's an international institution or a global institution in Northeast Ohio, what do you think of? And you can just shout it out. Eaton. The clinic. Sherwin-Williams. Phillips, Lubrizol. These are, and some people then say the orchestra, the art museum. This is exactly what comes up. What never comes up is Case Western Reserve University. And when I first got here, I spent the first 6 months of my time, which was a real luxury because at that point there was nothing that I specifically had to do. I spent the first 6 months really going around and talking to people. And it is remarkable the amount of international activity that is going on at this university, and I dare say at any other, certainly research university around the country. Universities generally, and for Northeast Ohio specifically, Case Western Reserve really is the international center in many ways of the community. I'll talk to our colleague Cyrus Taylor, who's head of the College of Arts and Sciences, and he'll tell me that at any particular time he will have a student or a member of faculty literally on every continent, all 7 continents, throughout the world. So the challenge that I have in this role is to take that richness that we have and bring it together as something that's a university-wide initiative and not just something that each faculty member or each department or even each school is doing. We'll talk a lot more about what the challenges are, but that's in many ways what I'm trying to do in this role.
Great. So in some ways, David, I mean, you are at this moment in the life cycle of the chief strategist for us, on your way to building, obviously, a comprehensive strategy for the university. Heather's clearly already executing against a comprehensive strategy. And Eva, I know that, you know, in the history of your work in Barcelona, that you've played both the role of strategist and then engaging with both the administration of the Open University as well as the faculty in really developing a strategy for execution. So why don't you help sort of the audience who probably knows less about UOC, the Open University of Catalonia, than either NYU and certainly Case Western Reserve.
That's right. Well, again, my name is Eva, and I work with the Open University of Catalonia, also known as UOC. And what's important to say is that it was founded more than 15 years ago. It was as an online university, so it has no baggage of a traditional institution, and that meant that we had a great talent, you know, technology-wise, academically, in entering this new venture. And it's a fully online university. We don't have any traditional classrooms, and it's asynchronous. It was funded by the Catalan government, so people who spoke the local language could study from all around the world. So fully online and asynchronous. Now, at this moment, we're more than 50,000 students. That's sort of to give you an idea of our institution.
Is that 15 or 50?
50,000. And well, we believe, UOC believes that technology-enhanced learning is not there to just replicate what was being done in traditional settings. It really believes it can even improve it, make it better, make it different, revolutionize the educational sector. And in this sense, it's when it comes international. Why? Because technology allows us to be able to improve in quality. We are able, our international efforts are mainly directed at identifying faculty from all around the world, students from all around the world, because that creates a better diverse groups, diversity, helping you know, our system lead students to creativity and innovation. So we recently, the past year, we launched the pilot Global Campus, and in English and French. It will also be available in different languages, and this allows us to partner with institutions that are English-speaking, French-speaking, and bring groups that are diverse in the classroom as well. So the main idea for this was to promote innovation and creativity. At the same time, we are a fully open source university. We started with our own, because it was 15 years ago that we started. It was like a proprietary platform. At this point, it's open source, and we don't believe in a platform, but a set of platforms. We'll speak about that maybe later. So our other international effort is directed at contributing, to the world at large. We want to promote higher ed all around the world, and we believe that with open source initiatives and with collaboration and through networking and everything, it's an opportunity for knowledge exchange. And the last thing I'm just going to mention internationally that we're working on is the challenges that we have. We cannot move forward if we don't solve challenges such as interoperability, accessibility, mobility, and standards. We're working very hard with institutions from all around the world in finding solutions for that. So we can actually develop systems that will allow all of our institutions to collaborate and do everything else.
Thanks, Eva. So one of the recurring themes, and obviously one might argue it's actually an imperative, has to do with leveraging technology to advance creativity and innovation efforts. It's certainly whether that's for itself and in and of itself or as a means to some other set of institutional goals. Maybe I can kind of go back down the road the other way and start with Eva and just share some of your thoughts about whether in the UOC environment, as you have gone down this journey for the last 15 years, that there, if I can sort of join something to the opening morning panel where we talked a lot about experiential learning being a very important quality, what do you see happening in creating some kind of distinctive experiential environment, especially in yours where it's fundamentally asynchronous?
I was going to say I was in a work group before, and the efforts done synchronously are very different. It's easier to engage students if you can have live sessions and live connections. It's a challenge when it's asynchronous. We have been working with when Second Life came in, with these kind of environments, and we have experimented, I think, with everything at this point. But what we are actually finding is that the solution is not in the technology necessarily. And again,
then that it's in the design?
Well, it's a couple of things I mentioned earlier. We think that the faculty need to be retrained, need to be interested, motivated, and they need to become real mentors. And the technology, we're finding our bet at this moment. We are leading a project called Learning Apps. Because the Learning Apps project, it's like the App Store, but for learning applications. And to develop a wide array of different applications and technologies that can be placed, because not one technology is helpful for one subject or course or theme. So people are building it outside. So we want to be able to, we're developing this portal so people can develop more immersive or experiential or whatever, because even email can be very experiential depending on how you use it and who you use it with. So the tool will depend on how it's used. But and we think that everything is already being developed outside. So what we are focusing on is in participating in the creation of a portal that will allow us to generate our own content, open it up to other people's contents, and not necessarily by faculty or by students, but also people from outside. So a pool of resources, and then the faculty member, the mentor, will be able to assess which one can be more engaging, will allow for immersive.
So the Learning Apps project is an invitation in some ways to create and thus experience the making of learning materials that you can share with your peers and or with a broader community.
Exactly, and we're finding that for learning languages, you may depend. We have an app that it's like a blog voice that can automatically evaluate if your accent is correct or not. I mean, there are many things. We have simulations done for law, but it's not enough. I think we need every classroom needs a variety of tools, not one tool. There's not one system.
So talking about not enough, I know one of the things, David, that I observe is that our students are hyper-connected to the world around them. I just finished teaching a class where more of the students were planning to go to Africa this summer than they were planning to stick around in Cleveland. How did they get to Africa? It was all done over the internet, all done with Facebook, all done with Engineers Beyond Borders. I mean, it's all of that kind of activity. What do you think about our institutional challenges and opportunities when it comes to creating a experiential framework for students above and beyond what they do on their own, or is what they do on their own enough to kind of really catalyze our university's work in this space?
So I think if you assume that the underlying issue here is how students ultimately come out of our institutions and with what kind of abilities and understandings. And I know we're likely to talk about a question of this phrase global citizenship, but if they're coming out with some basic, if we want them to come out with some basic understanding of another culture and some sense of what the history is of another country or society, and ultimately some ability to be able to operate in the world in a way that they might not have been able to operate when they're going into university, then I think you need to look at a continuum of experiences that they can have. So we're at the end actually a week and a half away, we think, from voting on a strategic plan in the international area. And as part of that, we had a group that was working on what we called international experiences and education abroad. Seeing that there was a continuum from sitting in Cleveland, Ohio, and having an international experience where the student is being broadened, all the way to spending a year in some country overseas, maybe with a host family speaking that language. And I think we need to, in many ways, assume that all of those experiences are valuable for the student. And then the question is, how do you make sure that it's part of a curriculum that encompasses all of those kinds of experiences?
David, I mean, just before we came up, we were having a cup of coffee, and Heather, you observed that now that you obviously have the home campus in NYU, in New York. You've obviously got this first year under your belt in Abu Dhabi, and you're beginning to plan in Shanghai. This question of how to create a NYU experience, no matter where you are. We talk a lot here about creating a case experience, and I think it's fair to say those of us who've been in the trenches, it's anything but a settled issue. We can sort of definitely assume that the Civil War will go on for many, many more years. Talk a little bit about what you and your colleagues are thinking about when it comes to creating an NYU experience when you are both physically in multiple geographies, societies, cultures, and what, if anything, you're doing to leverage technology to address some of that.
Sure. So I think probably the most important thing for me to say here is that the NYU experience actually, regardless of the site one is studying or working in, is now a global experience. So although I'm based in New York, I'm part of a global network university, and so are the students, and so are the faculty. And that starts, from anything to logging into a portal and having it relate my major, my role, the courses that I'm taking, the systems that I have access to, as well as information about geographically the location where I am. So some sense of a technology that provides a location-aware, role-aware sensitivity around the experience is important. I think also thinking about the student environment, having the ability to learn and having somewhat of a, not uniform, but somewhat of a standard sense of how I have access to my information. So that when I log in, if I'm working on a research project or I'm working on a set of papers, when I go abroad and study for a year, and our students do have requirements about studying abroad, and in fact, the Abu Dhabi campus, the students need to study abroad for 2 years. So they will be clearly moving, and they will need access to their information, their papers, their data, and thinking too about the creation of a capstone experience or a portfolio of materials, or even taking the MCATs at the end of an undergraduate career and still being able to have access to all of those resources across the disparate locations is vitally important. I think at the same time, there's also the recognition that there are unique things about each of the geographic locations, and part of the experience, both for the local community and for NYU, is the interaction. And so an example of a project around data, thinking of the talk about data and through the pyramid of wisdom this morning, hearkening back to that, is students being able to, say, work with the local government and collect data. Perhaps it's on a reef that's outside the city in the body of water, and then creating an engine that allows a student to then go to another city by the sea and collect data and begin to make comparisons. And from the technical side, thinking about, well, what is the engine that runs that? And might that actually be a common data set and a common tool that folks on an archaeological dig or in a different city might add some other flavor to? So there's an interdisciplinary interaction as well. So I think all of those, from the plain user experience, if you will, having some sense of, this is NYU, and when I swipe my ID, even if I'm in halfway across the world, I can still get access to the buildings and the resources at the very simplest level, to the, there's my data, and I can continue to build on that as a researcher, as a student, and as a community member in the different geographical locations.
Let me just sort of jump in and sort of say, for a lot of universities around the country, and we'll ask Eva if that means maybe also around the world, the kind of work that you're doing would put fear in the hearts of most university administrators on the overwhelming amount of organizational and bureaucratic and legal and compliance-related activity that even sort of the boldest of people might fear to tread into that environment. And obviously, you and your colleagues are working every day to try to address some of these issues. Is there an underlying piece of philosophy, an underlying principle that the institution is committed to that allows it to work up the nerve to take on what's, again, I'll just speak for myself and my own impression of our institution, seems oftentimes as insurmountable amount of both challenges out there, not to mention trying to help move the institution internally towards some engagement. Is there something deeper, and might some of that be, I mean, is any of that relevant to this notion of global citizenship, or is it something completely different?
Sure, I think certainly there is something, and I would even suggest that there's something at the intellectual level, there's something at the business case level, and then there's also something at the heart and gut level that comes with all of this. And I think NYU has a leader who, John Sexton, the president of the university, is a strategic visionary, if you will, and he has spoken with passion and researched with passion in all of this, and that's something that does permeate across the university, and I think that type of emphasis can sort of bridge the initial gap. But I think beyond that, there is, as Appia, the Princeton philosopher, would say, there's the sense of cosmopolitanism, and that we are in and of the world. NYU sort of was historically in and of the city, and thinking about the globe, actually there are connections and important values that permeate across societies, across political orientations, across religions, and I think that's really something that's embraced by many, certainly not all, at a philosophical level, and as we all know, sometimes that can help the weary bones.
So Eva, one of the other things that we chatted about just briefly was that while universities work themselves into knots trying to sort of sort through strategies and planning around globalization, and our students almost entirely realize that their world is fully connected and globalized. Our faculty work in a completely connected and globalized world. It's the institution that is having its kind of this identity, at least in our part of the world, a kind of a challenge of figuring out how to work its way out of the coziness, the cocoon of what we thought when the rest of the world somehow was coming to Cleveland, Ohio, for example, as opposed to us trying to figure out, so how exactly do we interact with the world around us. When I have had the pleasure of visiting with you in Barcelona, I get the distinct impression that you also have a kind of cosmopolitan sensibility among yourselves and your colleagues around the role of your institution in opening up the learning to not only the immediate neighborhood or to one agenda, but really a kind of sense of global or cosmopolitan sort of imperative. Is that about right?
Definitely. I think we are definitely value-driven, and with the vision of really taking online education, in our case, as a differential on what can change and revolutionize education. And I think what I was going to say skipped my mind, but what was I going to say?
Cosmopolitan. Is that, you said it was you are a value-driven institution.
Yeah, so we are definitely out there because we think that's the way to change. We're not driven by business in our case, and it's a different. What I was going to say is a differential. I mean, staying local, any traditional university could stay local. The difference for being fully online is that we can be global. So we were born with a vision of being global. And
so David, I mean, where would we, in our thinking here at Case Western Reserve, sort of sit between creating some kind of differentiated experience? Clearly, you know, we're not born of new cloth. I mean, we've got a 180-year tradition that we're trying to work through, and not necessarily, I guess if you sort of talked about the ethos of Northeast Ohio, it may not be of the city in the same way that NYU sees itself as kind of the city. What are some of our sort of opportunities for building on strengths when it comes to creating a global citizenship strategy for an institution like ours?
Well, I think that when we think of where we are and where the world is going, we need to look at a variety of forces that, Lev, you and I have talked about actually a great deal, because a university like ours, I think, is going to get really buffeted unless we get in front of the curve of where things are going. And we need to play, in a sense, from our strengths. We also need to think about what is in the future. So when I thought about this, I think about three large forces that are driving much of what corporate America, governments, and certainly universities are going to have to deal with. So one, which is the focus of today, is technology. Clearly, you know, we as an institution need to recognize that we can't forever have as the only model of delivering education one professor standing up in front of 20 or 30 or even 100 students, because over time that's going to be, I think, a financially difficult model to continue with. So one is technology. A second is demographics. You know, if you look around the world, the U.S. is pretty steady state between now and 2050 in terms of number of college-age students. Europe is the same, maybe even declining. India, China have more or less peaked, and certainly in China's case are actually going down. And then Africa is growing like crazy. In fact, there was something in yesterday's paper that said that the world's population is going to grow by an extra billion people between now and 2100. And as an institution that's thinking globally, realizing where demographics and population are going, how do we think about ourselves capturing, you know, some of that? And then the final sort of force that I think about, at least, is mobility. Generally, people as they're moving from one society to another, but in our case, student mobility, where you see that if you went back 15 years ago, most students who went from one country to another to study came to the United States. A fairly large percentage came to the United States. Now, China, Singapore, Australia, England, they all are attracting many, many students from other places, and more U.S. students are starting to go elsewhere as well. So when you think about all of these kinds of forces that are at play, we as Case Western Reserve, and certainly NYU and others, need to think about where do we sit in that sort of matrix of issues. And that's part of the strategic thinking that I think we're doing now, so that we can get ahead of that as we think about it, rather than getting caught up in what could be a very difficult period otherwise.
And I guess you're nodding your head. Is that sort of in violent agreement with David?
Yes,
or
you know, I'm thinking about the idea of sort of mapping and asset mapping, thinking around the globe. And I think one of the very important hallmarks of all of this is recognizing the uniqueness about each of the geographic areas that we engage with in whatever the engagement is. And when I was last abroad, I met with actually one of the deans who went along with an administrator, a finance administrator from the university, and led a January mid-break regional travel. And they took a bunch of NYU students to an orphanage, and it was primarily children with AIDS, and it was in Africa. And I asked her what they did when they were there, thinking that there may have been some creation of office support, what have you. And she said, the first thing that we did was all the students created an asset map. And I asked what that was, and she said, we put on a new lens and identified what the strengths and assets were within that community, within that orphanage. What were the strengths and what were the things that they had, or the perspective that they had, whatever those unique experiences were that we did not have. And it allowed us as students, as researchers, as fellows, to look at one another in a different way. And I think that that type of lens, just completely extrapolating that to the grander scale and thinking about locational assets as an institution, both within the US and outside the US, is precisely the type of work that leads to researchers solving grand challenges and people jointly identifying grand challenges for the world. And I think that's really a mission for higher education that steps beyond thinking about the business case and gets to the heart of what is global education about and where are we headed together globally in this world.
So let's just try to, and I'll give the audience notice that we're hoping that we've at least generated some lines of interest for you to take up in the Q&A, which is quickly coming your way. Although we have many other questions that we can move on. But let's take a look at one of the assets, to pick up on Heather's point, that many of our universities have. And of course, as Ava has described, her university was born out of the asset of technology in a networked, an emerging networked world. And as obviously, again, borrowing from some of the work, Heather, that you've done as you've now tried to figure out how to connect your campuses into a single global ecosystem. And as we think about designing this kind of effort, let's take a slightly deeper dive on the role that technology can play with respect to supporting, enabling, creating opportunities for that kind of unique, or the pursuit of a distinctive offering. And in some ways, Ava, you've already shared with us some of those sort of underpinning activities with open source efforts, and I know you're also significantly involved in OER and open education resources. Just share with our audience here in Cleveland some of the other technology-related efforts that serve to support collaboration, innovation, and creativity that you're helping to drive.
Well, I'm going to be a pain because we're talking about technology and I keep on talking about people, and I think
I'm trying.
No, it's just because I do think that it's all dependent on the people. I think that, and I have to link it to her comments on global citizenship. I think that we try to distinguish it like something that we could do, global education, something we could do. And the thing is that we are global citizens, and that's how our approach to it. We already are global citizens. Now, do we educate for what we are, or we educate for only one part of it? And then from that premise on, it's like, how do you use technology to understand what your role is as a global citizen? And then
So start answering some of that.
You start with values and respect, no? And the only way to promote those values and to understand others is communicating. So any tool that allows for communication, between two blogs, wikis, Facebooks, anything But you do need filtering, like before in the previous, David's comment, you do need filtering, you do need mentors, because there's a lot of information and a lot of ways that you can have an online seminar. Or so we do. I mean, the way we collaborate with others, we use all types of.
So let me jump in. So Eva, if I was to speak to a regular, typical student of your online university, and I asked them about sort of, give me one or two things that you think are really special about your experience, would they say collaborative environment? Would that be one of the things that they would be mentioning?
Definitely, it's a need, it's a requirement. I mean, the only way that well, one way, discussion and sharing, it's the way of learning, and sharing thoughts and of course constructive discussions basically, and that you need to do it through collaborating. Now, whether you have video or not, you use email. That we have carried out great collaborations with African countries and places that had limited bandwidth and everything just via email. I mean, you could do collaborating. That's, I go back to people. It depends on your interests and being part of that global citizen. And what's your role? And how can you contribute? How can you identify assets in Sri Lanka so you can give this part? We can collaborate with technology. So part of our role all the time is collaborating with technology, but we get a lot in return. Knowledge, exchange, diversity, etc., which is in our core values.
Sure. Okay, so I mean, you've been at least nothing else consistent on saying it's not about technology. I've tried a couple of times. But maybe someone in the audience will push a little bit harder.
We are all technology, meaning everything is about technology, but I really insist in the role of the mentors, of the instructional designers, to inspire and to use effectively. In some ways,
if it's pervasively, if technology is pervasive, then in fact it's invisible. And I think that's your point, that in the end it's really about the ways you apply the technologies and the strategies, less than which tool this or that.
Exactly. There was a great slide this morning with this, or was it in the other room? It was in the other room. This comic of this professor who has just received from a class discussion 73 emails that she needs to read now. I mean, we're using a classroom discussion would take 1 hour, let's say 1 hour class discussion, 3 people would comment. Now online it's like 100 people comment. Are you going to read 100 emails every day? I mean, so are we using it efficiently? And that's so I think that we need to educate those who are designing the courses to use the right technology.
Good, and so there may be some questions from the audience about what kinds of successful use of technology you folks have had, especially as you design in multiple languages across multiple geographies. Heather, what about, you've mentioned already today that you've been working sort of back-end systems to create transparency, interoperability between different kinds of countries.
Right, and I think looking at sort of some of these larger systems enables an institution, say if you look at the boundaries of intramural and extramural, and within your university community, you can consider that intramural, and we know that there's tremendous amount of activity, research partners of faculty, students at other places that happens extramurally. So there's sort of a semi-permeable membrane in the systems, that there are sets of standards that need to be thought about in the architecture of these systems, also recognizing that these are things that are going to be, these are going to last over time to some degree, so that recognizing what community standards are and embracing those to some degree and having a supportable set of community standards is also something that's important. And I think as you develop kind of a community system with an open architecture built on standards, you can also start to look at things like recommender engines and linking people. Eva had mentioned locating an asset or a set of assets in Sri Lanka, and just the idea that there is content and information about folks who are in the community or intramural that could be used to connect people, to make recommendations. Hey, did you know so-and-so in X region is also looking at this, or did you know that there's a computational biologist who is also interested in exploring this topic? We at NYU have had this trouble just from the medical center down to the Washington Square campus. And so the idea that we could not only make those membranes a bit more permeable, but also look at the whole community and use technologies such as recommender engines or even content that retains information and is auto-generating is just a tremendous potential for systems. I mean, we're using them in our personal lives, or at least our students and teenage children are, and at the same time, we could be using these systems to some degree for educational purposes, and it doesn't, in my mind, necessarily mean creating one's own profile in 10 different places. There are means for gatekeeping and feeding information with appropriate permissions. So I think those are the kinds of things that we'll be looking at in the next frontier system-wide.
And David, while of course we don't have the problem of faculty not knowing how to cross the street or across the campus, unlike NYU, what comes to mind when you think about the opportunities of leveraging technologies to meet the campus as it is and the campus as we aspire it to be in the near term, as opposed to the sort of way off, so further term, which I guess it's fair to say our opening panel this morning spent a lot of time helping stretch our imaginations to the next chapter. If ours is just talking about the next page or two in the current chapter, what to your mind sort of looks like practical, pragmatic steps to use technology to advance?
Well, I think in a lot of ways it's much of what you actually raised and what I think about in my personal life at least, and I'm looking at what our kids and what students are doing is as an institution. I think we need to in many ways catch up to where they are. You know, I'll go into my 16-year-old daughter's room. She had a summer camping experience last summer with kids from all over the place, and one of her friends is in Japan. And I'll come into her room and she's Skyping with her friend in Japan. Well, you know, this is the kind of thing that every student who's now coming into university is doing in their personal lives and what they're used to doing. What we need to figure out, what we are figuring out, but what we need to do, I think, a better job of, if you're talking about, you know, in the short term, is how do we make sure that the way that we're teaching and the way that we're researching is catching up to what they're doing. And there were many sessions today that have been talking about those kinds of things that we're doing. We just need to make it now more pervasive, and we need to be pushing it not just in individual faculty or schools, but as a university as a whole, I think.
Okay, well, as promised, folks, we've got a good 15 left for you to engage with our panel and with one another in the pursuit of collective knowledge in the networked room. The knowledge is in the room. So who will be first with a comment or a question? There's one here. Brian.
Yeah, I'd like you can all comment on the opposite sides of David. Seem to me two radically different economic models of how you're engaging globally. You know, the open university with a state-funded model and a very low overhead, as opposed to constructing campuses around the world and where the money for that comes from, and also the actual day-to-day operations of these things are, you know, I think vastly wide apart. In terms of how you're going to go about executing.
Right, and just before, maybe we'll ask for a sort of a comment and a reflection from Heather and Ava. I think the other thing that's quite important, and we've been talking over many years about hybrid models as well, and I think that's a new emerging sort of middle ground between a fully state-sponsored, publicly funded, all the way to, in truth, as Heather can share, not exactly privately funded as we might think on the other end of the spectrum, but perhaps you can just share at the very basics of kind of how the strategy of moving out of New York from an economic and business case came together.
Sure. So NYU NYU is a physical university in New York, and that model of establishing a physical presence in a geographic region is very much part of the model that has been embraced by our partners in other countries. And part of that is for the fact of establishing centers of excellence and expertise, not only in teaching and learning, but also in research as well. So there is a facility around science technology in the Abu Dhabi site. So there is a physical presence there, absolutely, as well. And very much a part of our business model is partnering with other locations. And so in these initiatives, there is a funding that's coming from other entities to support. So there's a reason for this, both in the physical and historic sense, as well as the geographic presence and requirements around research, for example. And then beyond that, the imperative that's coming from the funding sources as well.
Maybe you want to say a word about sort of global brand. I mean, I think that in some ways that's implied. I mean, interestingly enough, you've got a global brand strategy that's based on partnering with other entities who both like and would like to essentially co-brand their institutions and countries' futures with you. In the case of Ava, in your campus environment, one might have said, well, it's a publicly funded institution. Shouldn't we be worried about our own as a kind of very local kind of effort? So how do you create brand awareness about this whole global online environment when publicly funding is coming out of people who are paying tax dollars right in Catalonia? So maybe we could start here and ask you to reflect on both the business model, which is, correct if we're not right, that's largely publicly funded, and we'll talk about the branding question as well.
Yeah, but our actual, what's pushing us to be global or build a global brand, which is not our objective, is a model. It's trying to replicate the model, in a way, the online model. But I think that it's important to say that there's not one model will not fit every single profile of students. There's an option for many formulas to coexist, and it depends on the profile and interests of the students and subject and everything that one system, educational system, may be better for one person or another. In our case, we believe in the asynchronous, fully online, because that can provide also many sorts of benefits. The benefits of, it's easier to collaborate in a group. You can be in a group setting in a workshop with asynchronous people. You will use different kind of technology and different kind of dynamics and everything. So I think, no, I don't know if that answers that.
What about sort of the underlying business model? Could you imagine yourselves offering the kind of curricular and delivery systems if it was strictly a market-based system? In other words, only pay as you go, as opposed to a broader public investment in the institution? And would you have to change the strategy?
Yeah, well, we are also collaborating with other institutions, and we are very adaptable. Flexibility is our sort of middle name as well. So we adapt to the different settings, context of use, culture in which we'll adapt our learning models, our contents.
Why don't you jump in, Heather, on the question of brand and kind of how you think about sort of that issue of creating a global brand, and then David, feel free to comment, and we're ready for the next question after that.
Well, I think to understand NYU and branding, it helps to have a little bit of history about NYU over the past 2 decades. And NYU is a very different place, let's say 3 years ago, before this global initiative, than it was 17 years ago. And it's very much a regional institution. It's probably about the same age as CASE, and was primarily for educating folks in the city. And has had kind of a long history as a local regional place. And over the past 2 decades, rose very much in the ranks to be, the hottest list school that comes up. And so the issue of brand is very interesting when you talk with people who have been at NYU, the faculty and the administrators in general for many years, because it's something that's somewhat changed over time. So now NYU has a bit of a cachet and is recognized as a top research university, which is a different qualification in terms of Carnegie classification than it had been before. And so that brand in and of itself is of interest to the community. And I think that NYU is, in some ways, mirroring our president's journey with the law school as well. Is seen as kind of the underdog that kind of came up with this brand and it is now of interest. So there is a...
David, what do you sort of see in terms of opportunity for brand or no choice but to rethink a brand strategy in the context of our institution?
Well, I was going to go back initially to Brian's question, which had to do with funding and you know how you reach out globally depending on what your funding ability is. And I mean, I am in the middle between these two, but I also feel like the institution is in the middle. We're not a publicly funded institution, clearly, and privately we don't get the kind of money that NYU has clearly gotten when it's gone out to Abu Dhabi and other places to establish campuses. So the question of how do we do this in a way that we make sure that our students are able to have that kind of international experience, we're able to bring students from abroad to Cleveland, and do it in a way that we can pay for it, is part of what this whole sort of strategic thinking is about. And it goes straight to branding in many ways, Lev, because ultimately, if the brand is recognized, and there's a lot to be said about the Case Western Reserve brand, if we can take not just individual schools and what they're doing, but if we take the university as a whole and talk about the kinds of things that we're doing, the kinds of research, the kinds of education, that then drives a lot of the global kinds of interactions that can go on, and also helps drive funding, because you're getting students from abroad here who are willing to pay to come to Case. And we had a little bit of a conversation about this before. You're getting more and more students who want to go abroad, who are able to and who can afford to pay the price to go abroad. So the branding and the funding question, I think, come together pretty closely.
Let's see if we have another question or two. There's three right in a row there. So let's see if we can't get the questions on the floor. Tom, why don't you go first and then pass the microphone forward and then forward again.
Yes, in working with different countries and different cultures, how do you approach situations where there may be significant differences in approaches to things like academic freedom or intellectual property?
That's one question that's actually we've talked a little bit about. Why don't we just move the microphone forward?
Hi, Deb Kiak-Franson from Colorado. My question has to do with how you get the right faculty to do this. Is it through a good selection process, or is it through faculty development?
Or both, perhaps. And we'll certainly throw that one initially to Ava. She's thought about that a lot. Gladys?
If I'm a top-level academic, why do I have to be stuck in one organization?
And so,
why can't I be in both NYU and Case?
Or UWalk or something.
Right.
Right.
And why can't a bunch of top-star academics just create their own virtual university and, you know, it's kind of like a self-organizing
All right, I'm going to make sure that we tackle all three, everything from, but jump in, and I'll make sure that we get to at least a word or two about each of those three.
There, jump. Bad memory, so
yes.
I was going to say, for example, in our university has like over 2,000 adjunct faculty, and they all, it's sort of like even a requirement, are teaching in different universities. That's very valuable for us.
Okay.
So
I'll come back to you on faculty development and how to get the right faculty engaged. Given so in this country, adjuncts faculty status is only a half a step up, generally speaking, than sort of slave labor of being a graduate student and teaching. That's the truth. It's not necessarily the most rewarding financially. So in other words, how do you actually create a sustainable strategy to put bread on the table while you pursue, by choice, a multi-institutional relationship? Any thoughts about sort of how or if that's part of the mix? Is that something that you know anything about, Heather, at NYU? Is that something that one sees? I certainly have seen multi-institutional, superstar faculty with multiple institutional relationships. They're tricky, but I'd be interested in knowing whether or not you're aware of any and what prospects you see.
Well, I think multi-institutional in what respect is my question back, and I'm thinking most of the STAR faculty who I know of have research partners and in some cases research groups, and in even other cases research facilities at other institutions as well, whether it's where they were previously or some type of a joint funding initiative that they have, or they use the same supercomputing facility or something. So I think that faculty in many ways naturally have a tendency toward bridging. I think additionally there's an interesting question there around students as well, particularly as there are standards around the type of content that's created, and particularly where there are models, as we've discussed, around asynchronous delivery of content online. So these are all questions that I think will continue to be discussed, certainly.
If you want to transition to this question about, so then how to identify faculty, certainly at NYU, to the extent that outsiders to NYU hear any pushback about your global strategy, it's been among the fairly predictable ranks of some of the faculty. What has been the strategy for engaging with faculty who not only want to work in Abu Dhabi or in Shanghai, but actually want to be part of thinking through the technology opportunities that are associated with creating a kind of unifying or integrated approach? How do you get those faculty engaged? And I'll throw it back to my other colleagues briefly for a comment. We're nearly out of time, so
in 30 seconds, I think engagement happens in a number of different ways and can be at the teaching with technology level through sets of workshops and other faculty from other places who have done similar things, co-hosting and running a play in one region and doing a dialogue about the play in another region and having faculty take a look at that sort of thing. I think on other levels, absolutely, much of the entire curriculum discussion is a faculty-led discussion, and that emanates from the academic departments at NYU. That's not something that's relegated out to different sites.
But is NYU at the point in its own thinking that it can separate out the development of curriculum from the delivery of curriculum, and are faculty who are responsible for the imprimatur of the curriculum prepared to not only give it to adjunct faculty to deliver in class, but prepared to basically work on a business model that has others delivering it?
That's not the place where NYU is right now. Whether it will be, I don't know, but that is not the model. It's not a separate model.
Ava, of almost all open universities, that there's a curriculum creation effort, and then there's a delivery that's effectively a very different business service line.
Yeah, but it would be, wouldn't be the case here. I mean, I'm thinking about NYU or adjunct faculty. I mean, there's someone developing the content and the syllabus.
We're very comfortable doing it in place. We do that, 50% or more of our faculty, unfortunately for some, would say, are adjunct. Others would say that's just the nature of the environment we live in. But that's in the physical world of the traditional university. And we don't, Case or NYU, have a kind of consensus that our faculty will provide their imprimatur for the curriculum, but that it would be very natural for an adjunct to deliver it in an online environment. And I'm thinking almost all open universities work exactly that way.
Yeah, though we give an opportunity for everyone to be involved in the design process. And for example, in the office that develops all the technology and all the campus environment always includes faculty or adjunct faculty, we call them online instructors, into the process. Because that's, in answer to her question, that's the way to involve them, to motivate them, to keep them interested, and to inform them, know what technology. So most of the time, not only that, but we actually respond they know more about their subject and what will be the best way to teach, whatever they need to teach to the audience that they want to teach.
What about one sentence on Tom's question that has to do with, in both of your cases, trying to think through essentially working around intercultural values around things that have to do with academic honesty and other kinds of issues where there may or may not be sort of a common baseline around those issues. Have you come up against any of that, Heather, where you're either sorting that through or have begun to sort that through?
Sure. So, a couple of the things that we think about include unfettered access to the internet, licensing around resources and materials that differ, intellectual property, and privacy, and we are looking at models around data, in particular data elements, and the types of privileges and privileged access and confidentiality and layering of data, as well as storage of data and different types of information and where those things might logically be located and where they may not logically be located. So that's very much part of the open discussion, both in negotiations as well as in execution of any of our sites.
Sorry, Dave, jump in.
I would just say, Tom, to invite you to be part of the discussion at CASE, because this is something that I think will be an active discussion over the short period of time as we're sort of completing the strategic plan. One of the comments that's come up, it's now being circulated among faculty, is exactly this comment about academic freedom. And you can go from saying we're only going to partner with or work with universities or other organizations that have the same sort of academic freedom that we do here and that we're able to carry out in the United States, to the opposite, which says, well, we're going to work with universities and whatever their cultural norm is, we're going to adopt. My guess is we're not going to be very tolerant of the second, but the first is probably unrealistic if you want to do international work. So we've got to figure this out as we're moving forward. Other universities have had some thoughts on this, but I know this is an ongoing national conversation as well.
Eva, any insight from your part of the world?
My experience in this regard is that it depends on the collaboration agreement. The students, let's say, sign up with one university, and we're minimizing all the issues so far. So depending on which university you're actually...
In terms of articulating what the expectations are for academic integrity or academic honesty.
Exactly, so it depends on... And even if it's a joint degree, there's one that becomes your, mother. You may...
Well, you have been very tolerant as an audience. I hope you've enjoyed some of the conversation this afternoon, and I want to thank you for being a great audience and thank the panel for being spectacular. Thanks so much.